lead into this because it's all about the story, right? Whoever tells the story rules. Whoever controls the narrative gets to dictate terms to the country. And I'm going to introduce you to a new term, which is epistemic security. It comes from this organisation, Demos, the think tank. We talk about them all the time. They are champions of people, ideas, and democracy. Underlined, very important, and they are really calling the shots in terms of government policy right now. They actually brag in their own materials about being behind policies that have been adopted by successive governments over the past 30 years, whether that's Conservative or Labour governments. And they're really leading this change agenda that we're seeing run out across the country right now. They put out a huge amount of material since the new Labour government came in, relating to public-private partnerships, changes to inheritance tax, the transformation of public services through devolution and digitisation, all of which ultimately is about putting more money into the coffers of multinational corporations and more power into the hands of the state. We've spoken about these reports previously, and Demos itself has figured very heavily in column coverage over the years. It was founded by this guy, Sir Jeff Mulgan, former editor of Marxism Today, currently affiliated with UCL in London, the Rockefeller Foundation, also a very close friend of Julian Middleton from Common Purpose, and still actively involved in the Demos ecosystem. And Demos itself is run by this lady, Polly Curtis, who is a former journalist who most recently was at Tortoise Media. And I will just reference this again because I think this is important in the context of what we're talking about. When she was at Tortoise, she oversaw the release of this podcast, Hoaxed, in 2022 about the satanic ritual abuse case in Hampstead in North London. And as you can guess by the title, this was presented as a hoax, but it missed out key details from medical reports showing that the children had actually been sexually abused in the case. And I find that rather inexplicable, definitely negligent, maybe even a little bit suspicious, Polly, to be honest with you. And of course, she's now issuing reports about what they call epistemic security. This is a new term. It's been introduced into the lexicon. Epistemic Security 2029. This came out at the end of February from Demos. Fortifying the UK's information supply chain to tackle the democratic emergency. Let's just open that up a little bit, right? So epistemic, not a word that gets used on a daily basis, but what does it mean? It relates to knowledge or cognition. So this is our ability to think and to understand reality. That's what they're going after here. Security is ultimately about reinforcing the establishment narrative. And 2029, I think that's a direct reference to the next UK general election. Yeah, so that's what Demos are pushing for with this report. And if we could just get that back up on screen quickly, fortifying, so that's a defensive action. The information supply chain, which is a very odd way to talk about information and the creation of knowledge. It sounds like a manufactured industrial process, right? And I'll get into that again in a minute. And this is how they sort of think about this stuff. It's very strange. And then they're talking about a democratic emergency. And to me, that suggests that they're scared. They're actually losing control of the narrative as we run into not just the next general election in 4 years' time, but actually, you know, today, tomorrow, this year. And they need that narrative in place in order to get their agenda rolling out as they would like to. So let's just have a quick look at the information supply chain. So this talks about the production, distribution, acquisition, evaluation of information, which is then used to inform decision making and to coordinate action across society, right? And this process, this supply chain map has been basically made up by one of the academics who wrote the report, but then that's now being used to formulate policy because this stuff gets shared absolutely everywhere across the political networks, across the major parties, across the civil service, into academia. And apparently this process, this supply chain desperately needs to be managed and controlled more closely by the state. Ultimately, that's what all this ladders up to, right? And that includes through mechanisms like the Online Safety Act. And we can show you how that manifests, actually, because we've received at the column a rather extensive set of questions. How many pages is it?
That's a very good
About
question.
50? No, 70.
We're into the 80s and 90s. But
Right.
this shows you what the average media organisation is faced with under the incoming censorship rules from Ofcom, and be under no doubt this is censorship of free speech.
Yeah.
So many small organisations will drown under this in the first instance, but ultimately there's going to be more legislation to come. And Ben, you're absolutely on the trail of this.
Yeah, exactly. And I've heard stories of numerous small media outlets, small online communities basically say, we can't deal with this, we're going to close. Right. And this is all about driving the populace ultimately into the arms of establishment media, establishment controlled technology platforms. Right. But apparently that's not enough. Right. So we've already got this. That comes from the Online Safety Act. But according to this report, Epistemic Security, UK regulation falls short. One of the conclusions from page 19 is the UK has attempted to regulate online harms, but its legislation falls short in addressing information threats. The UK's Online Safety Act, OSA, lacks comprehensive measures. This report was actually issued before the Online Safety Act was even enacted. Yeah, that happened in March. This was issued in February. So they're kind of getting ahead of themselves a little bit here, I think it would be fair to say. And obviously all of this stuff's being done in the name of protecting democracy. Right. So you've got unelected think tanks funded by philanthropic wealth, connected to organisations like the World Economic Forum, as we'll get into, putting forward a policy agenda supposedly to protect people and to protect democracy. And it's really doing the absolute opposite. Where's it coming from? Crucially, so there are a few acknowledgements in the report. We can see there in the first paragraph, it references Polly Curtis, who we talked about, William Perrin, who I'm going to come back to in a moment, but then Professor Lorna Woods, Maeve Walsh, and Judith Townend. So those three ladies at the end there, very difficult to find out much information about who they are. You can't even find images of Maeve Walsh and Lorna Woods online. There's something from this website, which is the Online Safety Act network that they've established, right? What it tells us is that they're both connected to an organisation called Carnegie UK, which is a non-profit. This is a philanthropic fund, which is focused on, amongst other things, producing legislation around what they call online safety. And interestingly, if you look at Lorna Woods' profile in the bottom right, we can see there that she actually received an OBE for her influential work at Carnegie UK that underpinned the UK government's Online Safety Act. So this woman, this individual academic, her work paid for by that charity was used to formulate the legislation. That's where it's come from. It's come from that individual. And they've established this network in order to help organisations that are looking at the implementation of the Act. And let's have a little look at some of these organisations here that are part of that. So again, it's a lot of non-profits, anti-Semitism charities, the Centre for Countering Digital Hate there on the left, Ending Violence Against Women. So they've actually sort of redefined the meaning of the word violence, which basically means you can't disagree with women on the internet now, apparently. And obviously we're seeing lots more women going into public policy roles, so all of these things are interconnected with each other, and they're all ultimately about shutting down debate. And then this guy who I mentioned again before, this is William Perrin, OBE. He paid for this report to be written. So he's actually acknowledged as the man who paid for the report personally, not from one of his organisations that he's part of. He actually paid for it himself. He's a former policy advisor and private secretary to Tony Blair between 2001 and 2004. He's a trustee of something called the Indigo Trust, which is his own foundation I'm going to talk about next week, and they're actively involved elsewhere in the media ecosystem. It's really important to understand the scope of this. It's absolutely huge what's happening in media at the moment. He's also a trustee at Carnegie UK. He also received an OBE for his work around the Online Safety Act, and he was personally instrumental in setting up Ofcom in the first place. So again, this one individual, unelected, no one really understands what his background is, where he's come from. He's writing the legislation. He's establishing the institutions which are being used to attack organisations like the UK column and ultimately the British people. And we have to understand it like that. And that's being done through official channels. So this all is being overseen by Ofcom. So the first thing you see when you land on their website is enforcing the Online Safety Act. Obviously, we've got a picture of a teenager, a young white man who can't hear things that Auntie doesn't approve of, basically. I think this is the general gist of what we're hearing here. And who's Auntie? So, well, Melanie Dawes, she's the chief exec. She's been there since 2020, was a civil servant before that at various different departments, including work around devolution and local government. She was in the Cabinet Office for a number of years. And also she was a patron of something called the Patchwork Foundation, which is another one of these non-partisan, i.e. uniparty organisations focused on the radical transformation of the country, basically. I mean, you're looking at the total transformation of the nation, demographically, politically, economically, and actually she's part of that organisation. And I think we have to understand that that's probably the agenda that's being pushed here. It's not an agenda that is good for the British people. And interestingly, they've just announced 3 new board members who I'll just draw your attention to, because I think in particular their connections are very important. First one is this, Natalie Black. She's Group Director of Networks and Communications, joined in December last year from Cabinet Office. She's also a visiting professor at the LSE. And importantly, she is a young global leader of the World Economic Forum. Right, so you've got a young global leader of the World Economic Forum in a top executive position working at Ofcom, implementing this narrative control agenda. Who else? More World Economic Forum links via Tamara Ingram, Deputy Chair now of Ofcom, again appointed in December. So she's a non-exec of Marsh & McLennan, which is a global professional services firm, which is also a World Economic Forum partner. Yeah, there's a direct link here, again, through Tamara Ingram. She background in advertising. Interestingly, we used to share the same boss. So she reported to a guy for a short period of time who was then went on to be my boss a few years later. And he has some quite funny stories about her, which I can't share on air. But yeah, I thought that was an interesting connection. And then finally, Lord Allan, of Hallam, who's the new non-exec at Ofcom, who was before that the Vice President of Public Policy at Facebook. So he spent 10 years at Facebook. Again, another World Economic Forum partner, big tech company, heavy censors, absolutely all over this censorship agenda, working with organisations like Full Fact through the pandemic, that kind of thing. And these are the people that have been put in place at Ofcom in order to control our speech and to deliver an agenda that is basically being controlled by philanthropy and think tanks, and it's got absolutely nothing to do with protecting the best interests of the country, as far as I can tell.
Thank you very much, Ben. And the key to stopping it is for people to understand what's being done, how it's being done, and to expose it. Spread the word. And of course, if you believe in free speech, then Ofcom has got to be dealt with, because Ofcom's objective is as set out, and there's a lot more information to come. Ofcom's objective is to clamp down on free speech so that the only information the public get is effectively government-approved propaganda. Well, let's move on. If you like what the UK column is doing as a free media channel, then please support us. Of course, you can make a donation, or you can take out a monthly membership or an annual membership or a lifetime membership. You can also purchase from our shop. And of course, we always like to say that we make a small percentage from products, health products from Clive to Carl. Now, the key bit about what we do is information to be shared. So please share the information we put out. Do give us a mention as you do that, please. We are still on other platforms. We have a presence on YouTube at the moment, so that's good. Now, the conference at the weekend, this is going to be a really fantastic conference. The first thing to say is that we have a handful of tickets left. Those tickets will only be available till 5 o'clock this evening, and then they're gone. So if you've been thinking, do I or don't I, we would say to you, please come and join us, because it's going to be a really fun and very special event. And there is enough time for you to be mixing and chatting with all the speakers and the UK column team. And of course, it's in Cheltenham, really in the belly of the beast. So 5 o'clock, and those tickets are gone. If you've been thinking I should go, now's the time to buy the ticket. Get onto the UK column website. And we are going to be live streaming, which is going to be good for many people who can't get there. But at the end of the day, if you're there to really experience the event. So Both options available, but those tickets still available. Now, where does that take us? Well, it takes us to other people who are active. And Diane, this conference is coming up. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, Brian, this conference is called What's Wrong with Sex Education? All Children, All Ages, All Schools. It will be in Lisburn in Northern Ireland in just a few days, on the 7th of April. So that's just right after the conference, actually. The interesting thing about this to note, which I heard Mike say on Friday, is that Lisburn is Mike Robinson's hometown. So if you've ever wanted to see where Mike Robinson is from, then you should also go to the conference. We don't know everything about the conference, but what I do know is that it's been promoted by Hugh McCarthy, who I've been working with recently. We had an interview with him last week on sexualization and indoctrination in schools in Northern Ireland. And he's really informed on this topic, and he's also writing a 3-part series of articles for us. So parts 1 and 2 are already out in writing, and part 3 will be published next week. There's a number of things that are important about this conference, including the fact that they will be talking about the specific rights that parents have in Northern Ireland, about their children can experience through the curriculum or not, which is unique to Northern Ireland. We don't have it in the rest of the devolved nations. So definitely other people getting out there and doing things, and it's good to see that happening.
Okay, Diane, thank you very much for that. And also, interview going out at 1 o'clock tomorrow is with Catherine Austin-Fitz. Of course, Catherine done a huge amount of work on all sorts of subjects around the deep state and essentially what is coming into place around the rules-based international order. So very, very knowledgeable lady, and I'm sure that's going to be a really great